Now, let's say you got a scientist, a physicist, and he's got this nifty new telescope that'll look farther out than anybody's telescope ever looked before. All right, so he gets his telescope and he points it out there and he turns it on, and a random draw is taken from a probability distribution of all the possibilities, and that's what he sees. Now you have this social system of individual units of consciousness and the larger consciousness system. Now, if you have a social system, how does that social system configure itself for the lowest entropy possible? So think of a social system. Let's say I have 10,000 people, and all the people are about equal in two different groups. So here's 10,000, and over here's 10,000 people. And I'm going to give them all equal resources. They're all as intelligent as each other, and I'm going to give this one the same resources. I'm going to send them off on their own and come back, 100 years later and see what they've done with their resources. Okay? So what do you think will happen? Well, and which ones do you think will have the best effect and the least effect? Well, that group that cooperates, they all cooperate with each other, share, work together, take care of each other, and manage to spread those resources around as best they can so that everybody gets along. Okay? Now, on the other side, we'll say we have, and I'll call that just the love group because they care about each other. On the other side, I call the fear group. Now, the fear group, they don't trust each other because they're fearful. If you have no trust, then cooperation is difficult to get. And everybody is looking out for number one, for themselves. So even if they do get a little cooperation and they find along that cooperation a good way that they can advance by breaking that cooperation, taking all the money and running, they'll do it because it's all about them. It's not about others. So what happens is that in that group that is fear-based, that has no trust, that is all self-centered about them, they eventually realize that you can gang up with a couple of other people, and now you can take stuff away from just single people because you're a group, you have more power. So groups start to form up, and eventually these groups then have to fight with each other, and they form up into larger groups of groups. And eventually that group is a very hierarchical thing. The guy on top, or let's say the people on top, consume 95% of all the resources, and everybody else gets by on the crumbs that are left. And the people down at the very bottom are the people that do most of the grunt work that nobody else wants to do, and they just get enough to survive. That's what you get. That's how that progresses. Okay, so we have these two groups. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that the low entropy group is a group that shares and cares and has caring for the whole as well as the self. Okay, they're not self-centered. And the fear group has high entropy. They're always struggling. And even if one group happens to dominate, well, somebody wants to be in that dominant position, and they're going to take that one down, by
highly unstable.
Or so it's highly unstable. So the fear group is unstable. It never gets very far. Anybody gets much, it gets torn back down. So in the love group, somebody gets a good idea or gets an advantage, figures out something neat, he shares it. Everybody benefits from that advantage, and everybody gets what they need. Okay, now in the group of love, you have maximum amount of free individual choice. Your choices are optimal. You have maximum amount of choices. In the fear group, you have the minimal amount of choices because of all the things that are liable to get you. There's a lot of things you can't do. So think about now, how does that apply to us? Well, that fear group sounds a whole lot like us, our environment, right? We started in small groups and tribes, and we fought each other, and then we found out we could do better if we had a bigger tribe, because then others couldn't overtake us and we could overtake them. And we got big tribes, and then we got land, and we got nations, and we fight each other, trying to take each other's stuff. So that's kind of the way we are. We're in the fear group. The other group optimizes. They don't have any of that waste. and it's very stable. And everybody has the maximum opportunities to be whatever they want to be, because everyone in that group wants everybody else to have what they want and what they need. And everybody can kind of shuffle around a little bit to try to make that happen. So what that tells us is that cooperation, caring, and sharing are the low entropy solution for a social group. People interacting with each other with free will choices. All right. So now, what's the purpose of this consciousness system? It's to lower its entropy. And how does it do that? It does that with all of these individuated units of consciousness out there making choices in the virtual reality. And the choices, if they're low entropy, they're choices of caring and love and helping. It's how can I help, not what can I get? So that then tells us what our purpose is. Well, our purpose fundamentally is to lower entropy, but what that means in a social group is become love, become caring, care about other people, not be self-centered. So that's really what we're evolving toward. So this idea now, see, you get some big ideas here. You know, some of the mystics say, well, we're all one. Well, yes, we are all one. We're all piece of this larger conscious system. And other, you know, if you look at the fundamentals of most of the major religions, it's about peace and love and caring. Well, yes, that is what it's about. And that's how we evolve individually. And as we evolve, the whole system evolves. And besides that, the larger system, you can think of that like the operating system, you know, it's kind of in charge, it's the management. It is advantaged if we succeed. If we succeed, the whole system lowers its entropy because we're pieces of the system and we're lowering our entropy. So it will do what it can to help us succeed. So you mentioned synchronicities. Why do synchronicities happen? Because the system wants you to succeed. So what you need is the information that's in this book, and you walk into a bookstore or a library and this book like jumps off the shelf into your hands. You know, it's just all the books are sitting there except this one is pulled halfway out and gets your attention.
Unless that book is like the anarchist cookbook, which would increase entropy, right? So you would have a hard time finding it in this example.
Yeah, right. So the system would like you to succeed by making good choices. So it helps. It helps you along when it can, because your success is also its success. We are part of its strategy for its own evolution. So now that kind of puts the whole thing in context. Why is there a virtual reality? Why would consciousness do that? You know, what are the players and who are they and why are they doing that? It's because the choice is to evolve or de-evolve. And if you keep de-evolving, you end up back in that state of randomness and you don't even have an information system anymore. So we'll just call that death. The information system dies. So just like here in our biology, it's evolve or die. So that's the purpose, the cause. That's where we're going. That's why we're here. And that then defines who we are, why we're here, where did here come from, you know, what our purpose is being here. And a whole lot of things then fall into place with just that understanding. So this is a virtual reality. It's been computed. Now, how does that work? You're a piece of consciousness, and you interact with the larger consciousness system, which is the server. Okay? The server sends you a bunch of data. You look at that data, and you interpret that data as this reality. Same way it works in World of Warcraft. You log onto a server. The server sends your computer a bunch of data. That data is what? 1 million pixels lit up on a screen. And each pixel has position, color, and brightness. 3 variables on every pixel. So you get 1 million dots of light and you look at it and you say, oh, there's a river, there's a tree, there's a person walking around. Oh, that guy's got a long white beard. And you interpret all of that data to be this reality. So now the reality only exists in the minds of the players. It doesn't really exist as a thing of itself. If nobody logs on to World of Warcraft, what's the server doing of World of Warcraft? Nothing. It's got nobody there. Somebody logs on, and now the server starts sending that person data, you see. So without the players, there is no virtual reality. Virtual reality isn't a thing. It's just a computed thing, and it's only computed in the minds of the players. Now, another interesting idea is that the player doesn't necessarily interpret that information correctly. There can be errors in its interpretation. The player interprets all of those points of light on the screen depending on their own background, their own experience. When you first play World of Warcraft, if you're in your first character playing your first game, there's a whole lot of things you miss. You have no idea the significance of stuff that goes on, and your character falls in the water and he drowns because you don't know if you just pointed his head up, he'd swim. But you don't know that yet, So there's just a whole lot of things you don't know. So you have to learn through experience. So everybody doesn't interpret what they see exactly, with everything there. It's based on your experience. So you get data from your experience, knowledge, ignorance, fear, whatever else is in you, you interpret that data. And that is your reality. That is this physical reality. And it's a multiplayer game. So if I reach out and slap you, then the game will have you feeling the slap and reacting to it, just like in the World of Warcraft. They fight with each other and they interact and do things to each other. And it's got rules. If your World of Warcraft elf falls off a cliff, he gets hurt. He's out of action for a while. Well, in there, it's hit points. He loses hit points. Well, here, you get hurt or you get killed. You can get killed falling off a cliff in World of Warcraft too. So,
now, what about the non-physical components of that reality? So when you did your out-of-body experience, was that still in the simulation at a different level, or was that outside of the simulation?
That's outside of the simulation. I'm consciousness. Okay. I'm a piece of consciousness. I'm not limited to that virtual reality. Just like you're the player of World of Warcraft, you've got another reality around you. World of Warcraft is just where you play, right? So it's more like this. With you playing World of Warcraft, you're not immersed in it. You can always put the game on pause and go have a sandwich or go to the bathroom or something else and come back to it. Well, the way this works, you have this larger conscious system. A subset of that is the individuated unit of consciousness. And a subset of that is a thing I call a free will awareness unit. And that subset, just a partitioned off piece, takes all of the quality, all of the how low its entropy is up to this point from the good choices it's made. It takes that quality, and that then is the player of an avatar. That's at the birth of that avatar. Then that free will awareness unit is the consciousness that's playing it. It has no history. It doesn't remember anything intellectual. So it can't remember where it was, what it came from, how it got there. So from its viewpoint of that free will awareness unit, it is that avatar. Because every bit of its experience that it can remember and know about is experience it had through that avatar. So it believes it is that avatar. You don't believe that you're the elf in World of Warcraft because you're sitting in your own home, having a sandwich and conversation with your sister when she walks by. You know you're in some other space. But this is a totally 100% immersive reality. That free will awareness unit doesn't know anything else other than that. So that's the way we are. We think we are that avatar, but we're really a piece of consciousness. We can not look at that data stream. There's other data streams. We can say, all right, here's the data stream that defines the physical reality, and here's another data stream that is somewhere else. And that somewhere else is always non-physical compared to the data stream that defines the reality. So then we talk about physical and non-physical, and it turns out that there is really no meaning to physical and non-physical. Physical is where your intention is. Physical is where your awareness is. Non-physical is where your awareness is not. So as long as you're a free will awareness unit playing a game, virtual reality game with an avatar, then that virtual reality is your reality. That seems physical. So the world of Warcraft seems physical to your elf. Your elf can't walk through doors. He has to open doorknobs. A lot of things he can't do. He has to deal with the physical rules that define it. Well, you're the same way. You play this character, this human called Sean, and you have to abide by all the rules. You're making all the choices. And you have no idea that there's any other reality other than this because it's the only thing you've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. But you're still consciousness, and you can say, oh, over here's a different data stream. I can attach to that. Now I'm in some other reality. I'm not in this reality. I'm in a different reality, and I interpret that data to be this way. Well, when you're dreaming, you're in a different reality. You connect to a different data stream. You're not getting the physical data stream anymore. And when you're dreaming, you feel that in your dream, you're physical. All kinds of physical things happen in your dream, right? You run, you jump, you hide, you do things, you interact with people, you interact with things, and you and they are all physical. And your body lying in your bed asleep is non-physical because that's not in your dream reality. That's some other reality that you're not in now. You're in the dream reality now. So you can go into different realities, different virtual realities, and experience within those rule sets. So our dream reality has a very loose rule set. You can fly, you can teleport, you can do all kinds of things in a dream reality that you can't do here because this is a very tight rule set. And it's meant to be a tight rule set because everything interacts with everything else.
It's a harder game.
It's a much harder game, and you don't have as much freedom in the game because you have to obey all the rules, and the rules all have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic game rule is what we call physical causality. You have to have physical causality here in order to do something. So you flap your arms real fast trying to fly, it won't work because there's no physical causality that lets that happen. It just doesn't work. Where in your dreams, you could probably fly without flapping your arms, or you could flap your arms if you wanted to. It's different because you don't have a physical causality in that rule set. So yes, you can travel around with your mind and you can get different data streams and you can then experience those realities. Now, if you want to get in a reality, let's say you go to another reality that is physical-like. It's like ours. It has a very tight rule set with a physical causality in it. It's not ours. It's some other reality. Well, you can be outside of it and just look at it and hear it. You can get the data, that you hear. You can get the conversation as an outsider, but you can't interact because in order to interact, you have to have the rendering engine of that reality put you in the data stream. That's what makes you physical in that data stream. Otherwise, you're non-physical. So you can interact kind of non-physically with it, but to be physical in it, you have to get the rendering engine to actually put you in the data stream so that the other individuals there look at you and see you. You're part of their data stream now. You see, so you can do that. You can get into those other realities, but you have to have a good working relationship with the system to allow you to do it. You can't just barge in. You can't force your way in because the system won't put you in the data stream if they don't want to, if you're going to make a mess of things. So that's one thing. Now, yes, I've done that. I've been to other reality frames. I get the system to put me in. I've interacted with other people, physically interacted in other reality frames. I've been to lots of frames where you don't. All the things I'm telling you aren't just theoretical possibilities. These are all the things that I've done. These are all things out of my experience. So there's
what other reality frames are there? You have dreams, you have OBE. What other?
Well, a reality frame is always a data stream that you get. So when the system created this virtual reality, it didn't seem to want to put all its eggs in one basket to see how this virtual reality worked. All right, we may self-destruct. This virtual reality could turn to dust, right? That's a possibility. So, because we have free will choice, so we can make bad choices as well as good choices. So the system made more than one. It's got several of those going. The rule sets are fairly similar. The real basic rule sets are fairly similar because there's not a lot of initial conditions in rule sets that turn out to be stable over billions of years. Now, that's a fine-tuned thing, and it's not like you can do that 100 different ways. You can't. There's just a few ways that seems to work. So the basic physics is similar, although the kind of characters that evolve there can be very different. You can have your six-legged dog in some other virtual reality. So those kinds of things would be different. But the fundamentals of it, they all have gravity. They all have, a lot of the things that we have in our basic physics. So that's the nature of our reality. This is a computed reality. Now, you can get a whole lot of physicists to say that we live in an information-based reality. You can probably get 30% of the physicists, and these would be all the ones that are in particle physics and are in quantum theory.
Right.
So those guys will tell you, well, it looks like we're in an information-based reality, because they know that. They know that if they try to compute what comes out of that big hadron collider, that's over in Europe, that they can't do it except seeing reality as information. That's how they have to deal with it, and it's based on probability. So they say, okay, it seems to be we're based on information. But you say, well, what does that mean? And they shake their head and say, I don't have a clue what that means. I have no idea what that means. But it's just because they're stuck in a box, and they're stuck with this materialist thing, and they're stuck in a box because information's not material. Information's not a material thing. Information is non-physical. Let me put it a different way. Information is the significance, the importance, the value. It's not the book. It's not the cover on the book. It's not the ink. It's the ideas and the information and the significance that the ink tells you. That's the information. So the information depends on a consciousness. Consciousness gets the information. The physical stuff, the squiggles of ink on the pages, the paper itself, all of that, we'll call that data. And data can be passed around from person to person. But it takes a consciousness to look at that data and derive significance from it, meaning, value out of it. That requires a consciousness, you see. So information is non-physical, and it belongs to consciousness. It's not a physical trait. Yeah. If you take a book, you can put a book in a bottle. You can say, here's its volume, here's how much it weighs. You get all these physical characteristics, but they have nothing to do with the meaningfulness and the significance of what's written in that book. That's non-physical. So information is non-physical. So if the scientist said, well, this is a reality based on information, if they had an understanding that, well, information isn't really physical, that's attached to consciousness. It's not a physical thing. Data can be physical. Media can be physical, media that hold data, but information isn't. And then they would say, well, how do you get information? That means that reality must be computed, because if it's informational, then anything informational can be computed. There isn't anything that's in the information world that can't be computed. So that means it's computable. And if it's computable, that means it's a simulation or a virtual reality. So there really is no other logical explanation. If you look at the logic to, well, this reality is information-based, which a lot of physicists will say, but they refuse to see the next step. But the logical consequence of this relation being information-based is that it's a virtual reality. That's the only way you can get a reality that's information-based, as if it's a computed reality. There is no other way. So they're almost there. They've kind of got the root of it, but they can't bring themselves to see the connection.
Now, how much of it is, because in a simulation, if you are a software designer, you can design a simulation that's highly deterministic. You can design a simulation that's highly stochastic, or you can design a simulation that has a mixture of both. In a video game, there's frequently just one end, but there are multiple paths to that one end.
Sure.
Based on your theory, how does this simulation or this reality behave? Is it a mixture of both?
Yeah.
Is it one or the other?
Well, for one, it's remember, this is an evolved simulation. It started with initial conditions and rule set. It's not something that was programmed. But the rule set is primarily deterministic. It's got some randomness in it because some things are random, like radioactive decay. Stuff comes out in a random direction. There's natural randomness in things. So it's not absolutely deterministic because there's randomness involved. But for the most part, it's deterministic. These are the rules. Gravity is a rule. It's deterministic. You drop the rock, it always falls down. It's not like 10% of the time it falls up. It's always going to fall down. So the deterministic rules are there, but those rules can be used by the simulation to create a description at a higher level that's probabilistic. And it's much more efficient. Let me give you an example. If you had, let's say, an old Civil War cannon, okay, and you wanted to make a model of it, a computer model of it, you wanted to make a virtual reality Civil War cannon. Well, it's just a simple machine. It's a tube, and you put gunpowder in one end of the tube. It's a cylinder. You put gunpowder in one, you roll a ball in on top of the gunpowder, and you light a fuse, the gunpowder explodes, high pressure, and a ball gets pushed out the other end, right? It's a very simple thing. Now, if you were to try to model that at the atomic level, you couldn't do it. It's too hard. If you try to model it at the subatomic level, it's even harder. If you try to model it even at the molecular level, it's too hard. You'd have all the world supercomputers working for a week just to get the damn ball out of the tube once. It's just too much. But what you do when it's too hard like that is you do that model and you use the deterministic equations, but you only make the model once. So it is hard, but you just make a model one time, and here's a cannon model, all right? And I've got it down to a fairly detailed level, but when a cannon fires, if it fires 10 shots, they don't 10 all land on top of each other. There's what you call ballistic dispersion. So they land in a pattern around it because there's air currents. The barrel actually flexes. After the first shell's gone, the temperature changes, and the more you shoot, the temperature. So there's all these variables that are involved. And when you try to track all those variables deterministically, it's just horrendous. But I can make this cannon, and I can fire this cannon, and I can fire it, let's say, 1,000 times, and I can look at the pattern. So, okay, here's 1,000 fires. Now, here's the distribution, the probability distribution of where those shells land. Now I have a model. Instead of having to do a bottoms-up molecule by molecule, I just go into that distribution, a cannon fires. I do a random draw from that distribution, and that's where I put the cannonball. Simple. You see, really, really simple. So you've taken a problem that is too hard to work, and you've turned it into a problem that's not only not too hard to work, but it's almost trivial. You're picking something out of a lookup table. You just pick something random out of a distribution, and you stick the cannonball there, and that's where it goes. So in your model, goes boom, and the next thing you know, kaplunk, and it rolls. It's all random, but it'll stay in that pattern. So if the scientists got that cannon, if the elves all got that cannon and shot it 1,000 times, they'd get the same pattern, because that's the pattern you use to drop those balls, which is a pattern that your deterministic models allows you to compute. But now every time a cannon fires, let's say I got a Civil War game going on here, and I got 50,000 cannons, both sides added together, and they're all firing. Every one of them is a random draw from a probability distribution. You see, it's simple. And okay, I'll have little variations in my random draw. I'll say, here's a pattern as the temperature goes up for the number of balls that are fired. And here's a little, so you can put little tweaks in them so that there are little variations you can keep track of, but that's all statistical too. So somebody running around in this Civil War game, they don't know that that ball landed there because it was a random draw from a probability distribution. They have no idea because it makes sense. That's about where the balls land, and this one lands this way, and this one lands over a little bit. They know that there's dispersion, and they don't all land at the same place. So nobody on the ground inside that knows that it's a random draw from a probability distribution, not a whole very complex physical problem that's got literally 1,000 variables that are all changing, down at the molecular level. The powder never burns uniformly. Well, the temperature isn't even throughout the burn. It's a little hotter here and not so hot there. The barrel of the gun isn't a perfect cylinder. It's got flaws in it, and on and on and on.
And the hotter it gets, the more it'll bend, the more it bends.
Exactly. And it's just, there's, and the air isn't still. You've got wind blowing out there. You got all these variables going on, and to try to keep up with that in a bottoms-up materialistic model is just ridiculous. It's so much easier to use your deterministic rule set, create a model that works, and then you can use that model with little tweaks, thousands, millions of places, all over the place. It's simple. You don't have to do that. Now we look at our biology. Okay, it's very complex. Right? That is hugely complex biology. Does all that have to be computed? No, none of that has to be computed. You've got an elf. Does your elf have a heart? Does your elf have eardrums? He hears noises. Does your elf bleed? Everything that shows, everything that the action shows, that has to be rendered. Nothing else has to be rendered. So here I am, I'm sitting in a room, and does the system have to render oxygen here for me to breathe? Well, of course not. That's silly. Nobody can see oxygen. So I just sit here and carry on and talk with you, and it's just assumed that there's oxygen in this room. Now, get a chemist up here with a little test kit to see what the oxygen level is, and it'll have to render that oxygen because somebody's making a measurement. You see? So because somebody made a measurement, it has to render something physical for that measurement that's being made. And we just assume that it's always been there and it's always like that, and we're just measuring what it is. But it's actually occurring there by probability because we're making the measurements. You see how that ties right into the quantum physics and the
So, Tom, are you telling me that if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound?
I'm telling you that there is no tree and there is no woods, because if there's nobody there to see it, then there's no point in rendering the woods because there's no player. Now, let's say there's a squirrel lives in that woods. Then it has to be rendered according to the squirrel's consciousness, which is a lot different than a human consciousness. So that squirrel gets a data stream that shows that squirrel what's going on, the trees, the leaves, the nuts, whatever. But the squirrel only has that much rendering that suits its level of awareness. The squirrel's not worried about oxygen. The squirrel doesn't have a lot of the awareness, say, that people have, but it gets rendered. But there are no conscious beings in the woods, then there are no woods, because the woods would never be rendered. Remember, the game only exists in the minds of the players. So the squirrel may be a player. So the squirrel's a minor player, and he gets a little data stream. And you're a player, you get a data stream. So the reality only exists in the minds of the players. So that's the key thing. There is no virtualized, so there is no woods. So if there's some woods that there's no conscious being in there, then there is no woods. It doesn't exist. That is
the only way it would exist if there was a satellite that just passed over it at a certain point in time that was being monitored by somebody else.
Yeah, taking pictures. If it takes a picture, then it sees the woods. Now, let's say you got a scientist, a physicist, and he's got this nifty new telescope that'll look farther out than anybody's telescope ever looked before. All right, so he gets his telescope and he points it out there and he turns it on, and a random draw is taken from a probability distribution of all the possibilities, and that's what he sees. You see, that's what he sees. Now, once he sees it, it becomes a part of this reality. Just like if your elf walks into a tree, that tree now is part of the reality. Anybody else walks that same spot, they'll also see that same tree. It's part of the game. So that then becomes part of the reality. And anybody else looks in that spot, they'll see the same thing he saw, roughly, if their equipment's the same. So that defines it. But now if anybody looks at another spot, say next to it, another random draw from all the probability distribution of the possibilities. You see, there's lots of possibilities. So let's say what might be out there in outer space may be 1,000 different possibilities. But each possibility has more or less probability. So some things are really rare and other things are very common. So you take the random draw out of that probability distribution of all the possibilities, and that's what you see. So you're always going to see something that's possible, but you may see something that's rare or maybe something that's not, you see. So that's the way reality is created. Now, with your intention, you can modify those probability distributions. That's what I was talking about, how you can use your mind to heal or to get a parking space. You can modify the probability distributions depending on how good you are at it, how clear your mind is, how much you can get your intellect out of the game, and how much you practice with your intuitive side. You can make things happen or not happen. So that's the power of positive thinking, right? If you're a positive thinker, then a lot of positive things happen to you. If you're constantly whining and complaining and fussing and you're negative and, oh, woe is me and that kind of stuff, and all kinds of crap comes your way because you're creating that reality because of your own modification of the probabilities. So if you're really worried, if you got this little lump you found here on your neck and you're really worried about something, oh my God, that's probably cancer. Oh no, and you get really worried about it, what you're doing is raising the probability that that's cancerous.
Yeah.
And if you say, yeah, it's all, I'll get the doctor to look at it next time I'm in, it's not a big deal. And I'll go in and see, because it's good to find these things early, so I don't know what it is. And you go in and he sees it. Now you've raised the probability that it's benign because you're not feeding the negative side of the story. You're feeding the positive.
So you can
side.
still get cancer, but it's much less likely because of the intention.
Right. It might still be cancer. And you may say, oh, I'll really work on it and I'll use my mind to be real positive, but you still might get cancer anyway. I'm not saying you force reality to be the way you want it. You just modify the probabilities. And what you can do to modify them depends on what the probabilities are. Because say if you got something that's 1,000,000 to 1 and you want it to be 1 to 1,000,000, well, you're not going to do that. This is too much. You probably aren't going to change it that much unless there's a huge amount of randomness that goes with it. But things that have a lot of randomness involved in them, they're not fixed. They could be this way. They could be that way. They have uncertainty. That's the word I'm looking for. It's an uncertainty principle. Things that have uncertainty in them then can be modified more easily. Things that have very little uncertainty, then much harder to modify.
It's like the double slit experiment, right? If you're looking at the particles it goes through, you'll see one particle hit the screen. But if you're not looking at the particle and you look at the screen, you'll see the fringe pattern, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you look at the particle and you say, this just went through slit A, okay, then what'll happen is you'll get a particle that'll hit right behind slit A. So as long as you sit there, no, this one went through slit B, well, you'll get a particle that'll hit the screen right behind slit B. You see, because when you measured the particle at A, you created a particle. There was a probability, and there was a lot of possibilities, and a random draw was taken from those possibilities, and you got one going through A, and it's going to hit A because now you've got a particle now, because the measurement made a particle, and once the measurement is in the system, it stays in the system. And we all know that particles travel in a straight line unless acted on by some external force. There is no external force to make them move around and make a fringe pattern or a diffraction pattern, or what else we call it, an interference pattern, right? There's nothing that makes an interference pattern to move those particles like that. But if you don't look, and the measurement that's not made until the screen, you don't look at the holes, well, you don't really create a particle until they hit the screen. That's when the measurement's made. It's when they hit the screen. And when they hit the screen, a random draw is taken from a probability distribution that looks just like an interference pattern. That's the probability distribution. And that's what it looks like. It looks like an interference pattern. And why was the probability distribution just like an interference pattern? Because that's the only solution that avoids a conflict between quantum physics and optics. Because if you didn't make that distribution pattern looked like an interference pattern, that probability distribution looked like an interference pattern, you'd have a major conflict, logical conflict between optics, because we know about optics, you get two slits, the source, and they interfere, and they can, you draw the little lines, and this path is a little longer than that path, and you get the pattern. You can compute the interference pattern. But when you have photons who do not interact with each other, a photon is a non-interactive thing. It's not like little photons rub up against each other and decide what to do. They're totally non-interactive. So whether you have a million photons coming out of a laser pen or whether you have just one, it's the same deal. They're just a bunch of independent photons. Okay, well, independent photons go through those two slits, whether they come in a bunch or not. So if they come in a whole bunch, we call that optics. Now you got a laser pen shining on two slits, and they come by the billions, and they make an interference pattern. But the photons don't interact. So whether they come in billions or whether they come one at a time should make no difference whatsoever. There's no interaction between them at all. So how many is irrelevant. Aha, there's going to be a problem if the system chooses any other distribution function other than that one. So that's the one it chooses, and that's why you get that, because that then creates no conflict between optics and quantum physics.
Last question. What experiments can individuals do to test this theory in just the day-to-day life, like little small experiments?
Oh, well, there's day-to-day life experiments, and then there's big quantum mechanics experiments. I got a bunch of quantum physics experiments that are being done in universities now that will test this theory, because where the everyday physicist says this is the way it works and this is what will happen, I disagree. I said, no, it's not the way it works, and that's not what's going to happen. This other thing's going to happen. So I got some physicists doing the stuff in laboratories. So that is going to happen someday, I hope. I've had it going on now for a long time, but it's mostly been administrative problems, not really science problems so much. These are difficult experiments. When you're dealing with something that goes, 186,000 miles per second, that's pretty fast. And you're doing this in a lab that's only, a couple of yards. You're making this measurement on a table, on a bench. Well, to measure that little guy going that fast, and the amounts of energy are minuscule, in a photon. And so we're talking about things that are really hard to do, but they're doable. And the science hasn't been nearly so hard as just getting the people and the equipment together long enough to get it done. Mm-hmm. That's one set of experiments. I got it going in two different universities. I got another university doing it, and their hard part is that they were engineers, not physicists. And they, of course, most of this is electronic. All the equipment's mostly electronic equipment. So, they've got the inside knowledge of how all the equipment works and what it's doing. And they've been struggling with the details, though. They've been struggling with it for quite a while. The other university has physicists that have done this experiment before many times, and they know how to set it up and how to do it and have all the equipment, and they just have to get it done. But they hire some person. There was a postdoc in from some other university, and they were about 3 weeks away from getting the final answer, and the postdoc's up. He has to go back to his university because the postdoc's up. That kind of thing is what we've been running into, just life. And then they got a second guy, and he works on it for a couple of months, and he just doesn't know what he's doing. So the professor that's in charge, he said, no, you can't do this. You got to go do something else. And now you have to wait for a whole semester to go by, because that's when personnel can change at a university. They don't pull people in the middle of semesters, because all these people have to do other things, and not just to do my experiment. They have to do other things.
Right, they got to teach classes, TA, all that stuff.
Kind of stuff. So all that has to be coordinated, and it's just been that kind of a, crap happens sort of problem. But it'll get done. We've got it, and it will be done. So that'll be interesting. But what everyday things can people do? Well, there's lots of things. In my books, I tell people don't believe anything I tell you, because believing me is not helpful. That's just another belief. Beliefs are the enemy. You don't want to believe anything. If it's not your experience, it's not your truth. It's somebody else's truth. You have to have your own truth. So if I say this is the way reality is, you shouldn't believe me. You should say, well, maybe that's possible, and look at the possibilities and say, well, I'll give that a 0.1 or a 0.99 or wherever you want to place it, but then be open to more information and data as it comes in. So that's the way you approach life, not saying, I believe it, I don't believe it. That's just not helpful. It doesn't take you anywhere. You just become a believer or a disbeliever. A disbeliever is the same as a believer. It's just believing the opposite rather than rather than the thing. So that's just not helpful. So then all my people came to me and they said, hey, look, you tell us we need to have this as our own experience. So how do we do that? Help us out.
Right.
So I said, all right, you got me there. I wasn't going to teach any paranormal kind of stuff because that, kind of tarnishes my qualifieds, with the physics community. But you're right. I see your point. You can't get there without a little help. So I set up courses to teach people how to experience the larger conscious system. I think the course was exploring consciousness with Thomas Campbell, and I've done that now for a decade or so. So, lots of people have gone through the course, and that's the course I was telling you that I used to hone my binaural beats, because I used binaural beats in that course, and I'd keep changing them around to try to optimize them for that particular course. And that course, now, I haven't done that course anymore, because what Donna and Keith, those are the people I told you to go see if you wanted to buy the binaural beats at MBT events. They took all of those courses, so it was like 50 of them or something, and they went through all of them and collected the best out of all of them, the best questions that were asked, the best answers that was given, the best descriptions of how the paranormal things worked. And they went through all of them, combined those all into one audio program. And they come with the binaural beats, and it doesn't cost much. The whole thing, I think, is like $125 or $150 or something. The course itself, had you gone to the course, it would have been $2,000, because there would have been meals and lodging and all that stuff. But this is really cheap. So you get that course and you'll get the best of all of those, and you'll learn how to do all the paranormal things, how they work, why they work that way, why they don't work sometimes, what are the variables, what's important, what's not. So I suggest that anybody that wants to experience paranormal things, go get those courses. It doesn't cost much. It's a week-long course, but you can take it your own time. You can take it as many times as you want. You can spread that week over a month if you want. It's an audio course that you get. You can get them from the same place, MBT events. You can find that there. And I think the binaural beats come with it. So for $125, you save the $25 that would be, for the binaural beats. But anyway, there's lots of things you can do. The doing paranormal things is easy. It's not really very hard. The most difficult thing is to get your intellect out of the process. Your mind, your consciousness has two different paths that it processes information. One of them is an intellectual path, uses logic. The other is an intuitive path. It doesn't use logic. It's beyond logic. If the intellect tries to get the information out of the intuitive path, it fails. It's the whole thing. If you're getting information out of the intuitive path and the intellect comes over and starts to get involved in it, it crashes it. It's gone. Doesn't work anymore. Okay, that intuitive path isn't something that's magical. I mean, we all learn things intuitively about typing. Right now, most everybody touch types, right? Because typing is a thing. Computers are a thing. When I grew up, the only people that took typing were secretaries. Nobody else took typing. That wasn't part of the academic course. That was part of the commercial course. But that's different now. Everybody types at a keyboard because that's the main entryway into your computer. So a lot of people touch type. Well, that's intuitive. That's entirely intuitive. How do your fingers know where to go, when you're doing touch typing? Touch typing, I mean, you're not saying, okay, that's a T. Where's the T? Oh, there it is, right next to the R and the Y. I got it. If you type like that, that's how I type. If you type like that, you're very limited in how fast you can type. You're down around 5 words per minute at the best. But if you touch type, well, you can go as fast as somebody can talk. You can really go quickly. And that's because you are doing it all intuitively. If your intellect got involved and said, where's that key next to which one, you'd be done. It would crash. You just have to keep your intellect out of it and know that your fingers know what they're doing and let them do it intuitively.
It's like driving.
Yeah, like driving. Yeah. Right. At first, when you're driving, you're like this, trying to do it. And pretty soon, you get home and you think, how did I get here? I don't even remember the trip, So yes, anything that's complex, you can do so much better and more efficiently, intuitively, than you can intellectually. The intellectual tool isn't meant to do complex processes. It's meant to analyze, decode. There's a lot of things it can do, and you need that intellect. But the intuitive side, like athletes, the difference between a guy that gets a gold star and a guy that doesn't get any stars at all isn't how hard he trained or how good his trainer was. They're all fit. They all know what they're doing. They all have practice. It's the one that has the mental game going. Because of his mindset on winning and the positive attitude, he raises the probability of him being the winner. And he does real well. And most athletes will tell you that they're having a bad day, which means they can't get their mind focused in intuitive space. They can't do anything at all. They have a real crappy performance. And being a top-notch athlete has more to do with your mind than it has to do with anything else. And how do you get that way? Train to where you don't have to think about it. Everything is automatic. Get your intellect out of the game and let your intuition play the game for you, because you're much smarter that way and much faster. Yeah, so we use intuition all the time in life. I had a guy painting on my house, and he was doing these it was windows, had a lot of little square pieces of glass with lots of wood pieces crisscrossed through them. And he had to paint the wood without getting any paint on the glass. And when I do that, I put tape on the glass because the smears come off with the tape. He didn't use any tape, and he painted every molecule of wood, didn't get a single molecule of paint on the glass. And he did it in a third the time than anybody else would have done it. And I asked his boss, I says, how does he do that? How does he learn how to have that precise, coordination? And he says, he just gets in a zone. He says, he doesn't even know we're here. We could have a conversation standing right behind him and he wouldn't even know we were here. Well, his intellect was gone. He was just in that zone of doing what he does, and he did it perfectly. So anything that's complicated, you can do better, faster, quicker, and more accurately out of the intuitive side. Because the intuitive side doesn't have that bulky intellect. Is this the right way? Should I do it that way? How do I hold my bowling ball here? Should my hand be this way or that way? And should I roll it a little bit to this side because I know it's going to go to that other side? And all that intellect and analysis just wads up the machine. Whereas the intuition knows exactly what to do with it. And that intuition comes out of confidence. Confidence comes out of experience and practice. So all you have to do is learn to get your intellect to be quiet, and you can be good at all the intuitive things. Now, that little course I give will tell you how to do paranormal stuff, all the various paranormal things. Talk to dead people, talk to alive people, go out of body, remote view, mind to mind, all of the things that you can do, how to get data out of databases, health data and past lives and yada, yada, yada. It kind of tells you how they work, why they work, and how to do it. But I found that there was a group of people who sometimes were in my courses 4 and 5 times, and they just couldn't get it. They were struggling with it. And it's because they were so left brain dominant. They were so intellectually driven that it was real hard for them to get their intellect to sit down and be quiet. And most people in our culture are like that because, hey, you get rewarded for being intellectual and you get slapped for not being intellectual. You want a high-paying job? Well, you got to be smart. You got to use that intellect. You got to have a good memory, and you got to be able to do complicated things with your mind. If you're very right-brained and you have holistic pictures and come up with great answers, but you don't have any idea how you got them or where they came from or why they're the right answer, Yeah, well, that's entertaining, but nobody's going to pay you anything for that, you know. And even the remote viewers got shut down because the rest of the world couldn't understand them, you know. So it's not about whether you got quality information or not. It's just you conflict with the general culture and you're going to get run over when you do that. Oh, there's another path. You don't have to go through the traditional path of meditation. Meditation is a tool to help you discipline your consciousness. That's what it is. So without discipline, you have thoughts buzzing through your mind, all kinds of thoughts, all sorts of things, and it's hard to let go of them. And your meditation instructor says, well, just clear your mind. Just exist there with your mind clear. So you clear your mind for about 3 seconds and thought comes through, you know, and you go, oh, and then you clear it again, another 3 seconds, another thought comes through. And with practice, you get to 3 seconds to 10 seconds to a minute to 5 minutes. And eventually you get to the point that you have disciplined your mind to where you can put it in a theta state and it'll just sit there empty. So you can open yourself intuitively. And that's the traditional path that everybody goes. If you're going to learn how to do paranormal, learn to meditate first because you got to get some discipline in your mind. Well, there's another path. So I kind of invented this other way because these guys mostly were guys, just weren't able to get that intellect to be quiet. So there's another path that gets there just the same. It's a equivalent path, and it uses your imagination instead of your meditation. In other words, imagination is the tool. And the way it works is, well, let me just explain it. And everybody's probably experienced it. If you've ever had a daydream where you got so involved in that daydream that the daydream just kind of had a life of its own. You know, you started the daydream, and let's say it was two people, you and somebody else, and you said this, and then you imagine that they said that, and then you respond with this, and you imagine they said, you know, so you're playing both sides. You're putting words in the mouth of yourself and the other player. But eventually, if you get in most people have been in daydreams where they're not doing that. They are not consciously playing all the parts. The parts just seem to play themselves. You get into that daydream and you get so involved in it that stuff just happens and interactions just go. And it's not you. Well, that's a data stream. You're getting a data stream that's not this physical reality data stream from the larger consciousness system that is playing with your daydream. And it'll usually
you just described writing. Like that's literally writing. Like when you're writing fiction, let's say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You just let it go on its own. You just follow the lead and it goes, and you stop thinking about it and you just put it down. Right. That's an intuitive flow. That's called the creative process. All creative processes come out of the intuition, not the intellect. The intellect isn't, creative in that sense. All artists work out of their intuition. Musicians, everybody's, if they're really good, just like athletes, it's good because you've given up the intellectual part of it altogether. Now you need the intellect because the intellect will help you learn to play the instrument. It'll help you learn how to write good sentences, how things to use and things not. You need that intellect to give you the
That's what editing's for, Tom. That's what editing's for.
So you need some tools, but then the intuition knows how to use those tools. So yes, you let it go. So the idea is that you start with something that engages you fully. And by that, I mean, it should engage all your senses. You smell it, you can taste it. It's got smell, taste, portions to it. It's got touch, feeling, you see it, you hear it. So you have to get engaged, because the more fully you get engaged in it, the easier it is to just let it go on by itself. Because otherwise, you getting fully engaged as two different people talking to each other is more than your little brain can handle, and it makes it very difficult. And if there's 4 or 5 people involved, well, you just can't do that. You can't process that much data that fast. So get fully engaged, and it makes it a lot easier. So I created this thing I called Tom's Park. And what it is an environment that has a lot of interesting, fun things going on it that can engage you. And it's got a lot of different textures. It's got water, it's got dry, it's got sand, it's got grass, it's got trees, it's got animals. The animals all talk, they'll interact with you, and it's got all sorts of things to engage. And you start engaging it, but it also has a whole lot of places where paranormal things happen. Where you go to a certain room, you go to the healing room, and there's all sorts of things there and devices that help you focus your intent on your healing or out of body or other kinds of things. So you go into the park and you play with the physical stuff first until you get into it. It's
kind of like, it sounds like hypnosis a little bit.
Well, it is kind of self-hypnosis in a sense. You get into your story and what you're doing there. And then as you get into it, it's just natural to kind of walk up into some of those other areas and do other things. But it takes practice, because a lot of times people will, okay, I get into the jet ski. There's jet skis there that you can run, and there's lots of other things that are fun. He says, I can get into that to where I lose myself in it. But as soon as I start going toward the paranormal stuff, my intellect comes back in. But that's just some practice. And I've got things that are instant. You don't have to do process. I got a couple of yellow benches in this park that if you sit on it, it instantly transfers you to another reality. And there's lots of things like that. There's hot pools that are healing. There's just tons of stuff that are fun, require you to interact, and also leads you into paranormal experiences. So I call that Tom's Park. And it was a way for these guys who just couldn't get their intellect to be quiet to practice not meditation, because they just weren't able to keep that mind clear for more than just a minute or two before things would come in. Well, this doesn't matter. You don't have to meditate. Meditation's not in it at all. You simply practice with your imagination, getting good at imagining things. And you don't have to be in my park. You can imagine where you went. Remember when you were 10 years old and you went on vacation with your family? You can go back there and just replay that. Replay the things that happened to you all through your life, and just get back and replay them in detail, though. Enough detail that the interactions that you have, start to fill in by themselves. So what happens is they get into these rooms where they're doing paranormal things, and they start with their imagination, and then they get into it, and then stuff just happens, and they forget about the intellectual part, and they just go on with it, and it worked great. So then they're able to get there without taking the meditation route, but just by practicing with their imagination. And I've made a deal with the larger conscious system that anybody who plays in the game there in Tom's Park, the system will feed them data to match what their daydream is. So if you get a daydream about going fishing, then the data stream you get will be about going fishing. And it'll basically pick up exactly where you are and then lead you someplace else. To where you start out, you're providing 100% of the input and output, and then you're providing only 90%, and then only 80%, and then only 20% and 10%, and then none of it. It's all data stream. And the system very carefully matches what you're doing and then starts leading you off on a path someplace. And you'll mostly find that these paths take you someplace where there's something interesting for you to learn. They're almost always educational, because the system really isn't interested in entertaining you. It's interested in you growing up and making better choices. So it typically takes you to something that's a good learning event for you. So
all right, Tom.
So that's Tom's Park.
Yeah, I think.
What would we do?
I think we went an hour over. So
yeah, okay, we've been to 3 hours. Yeah, well, that tickle in my throat cleared up, so that's good. It's kind of behind us, but in any case, that's kind of it. There's lots of logical consequences that I haven't dealt with. There's lots of other places you can go to explore. I've only brushed over the top of it. Mostly, I should say, the resources you have are my books. You get them most of the places you buy books. Libraries can order them.
I'll have links below.
Yeah, so that's one source. That'll give you the basic foundational, ideas. I have a website that's got like 1,000 videos playing. Those videos are often kind of long, but take them in pieces. Play a little bit of it and come back later. YouTube will keep your place. It'll let you come back and start back up at the same place. So I got, lots and lots of hours of video. I got a search tool that I created. I didn't create it. Some techie friends recreated it. So you can go in and search those thousands of videos by subject, and it'll pull out little pieces from each one and give you a link and a timestamp, take you right to the place where that's being played. So that's pretty handy. And shortly, I don't know how long it'll take, but hopefully in a month or 2 or 3, I'm going to have Uncle Tom there that you can have a conversation with, an AI bot that will have been trained on all of that data that's in YouTube plus the books. I'm going to train it on, all my material, and then let it be there for conversations if you want to talk to Uncle Tom. Now, I have big warnings that Uncle Tom may say something stupid, because AIs are not conscious. They're just clever at looking at stuff and bringing up things that might make sense. But they're getting pretty good. And, I would say it would be a really useful tool. You just have to make sure, as always, that you use your own brain to decide whether what you're hearing is good stuff or trash. But you should do that anyway, whether you're talking to a bot or not. You should do that when you talk to another human being. You always have to be aware of, what are you hearing, and is it good stuff or not? You don't just go off do stuff because some expert tells you to do it. That's being brain dead. You do stuff because it makes sense to you. So anyway, so that's basically where to go. Now, most of the science is going to be probably in the videos, because I didn't want my book to turn people off. Most people don't want to read about science.
There's a lot of people who just don't read anymore, which is not great.
Well, science puts a lot of people to sleep. So I kept it at a level that everybody can understand. It's not a science thing. It's not math-based. It's just, I'm a physicist, but this was written for everybody. And mainly it was written for those left-brain people who live in their intellect. So it will take you on this trip logically, step by step, logically. I've had any number of women who have gotten this book and asked their husbands to read it so their husbands could understand what they've been trying to tell them, but they're intuitive things. They're very intuitive, and their husbands just don't get any of that. And generally they've had a lot of success, because this is a way a left brain, intellectual, logical person can start and logically work all their way through it. So it's kind of an on-ramp to the intuition for, left brain logical types. And that's kind of what the book does. So people who are really right brain have a hard time reading it, because it's very logical, very dense in information. And right brainers don't process information. They just leap to the answer.
Yeah, they don't need the help, though. They have all the intuition.
Yeah, they get there without it. But us logical types need a pathway. And that pathway better darn be logical, otherwise we throw it away. So this is. So you'll find the basic theory in the books. You'll find a lot of the science in the videos, because that's more personal. And if you want a really good video that tells you the science, goes through a science, explains it pretty well, look up the MBT-LA 2016. In 2016, I gave a talk in Los Angeles where I introduced these experiments that I'm having the physicists work. But before I introduced them, I went through the whole theory of what's going on, how it works. Then I introduced the experiments, and then in day 2, I explained, what difference does it really make? Who really cares? Who really cares the outcome of physics experiments? What's really the impact to us, or to me now? And then we talk about the soft side of it, the love and caring side of it, rather than the science and logic of it. So that's a good one. And I've got a science trilogy up there that basically is a science that's in a playlist on YouTube. You go to the called Science Trilogy playlist, but it's not a trilogy anymore. It's probably got about 5 videos in it. If you really like the science part of it, if you like the how does it help me live my life and have better relationships, with my significant other and my friends, well, then there's a whole series of those that I did with Laurie Houston. She has a thing about something from the heart. Anyway, she's about caring and loving and relationship and that sort of thing. So we talk about that side of it, not the objective science, but the subjective science, the understanding how to deal with your fears, how to get rid of them, what the fears mean, what the fears allow you to do, how it is you are your worst enemy. Your fear is your worst enemy, and it makes a lot of your choices for you. And so that sort of thing, then you can get out of those. And there was a girl called Evita, did a series of in the soft side of MBT, the subjective side of MBT for that too. And I have a lot of that in my videos. There's just lots of stuff out there. So take your time. The only suggestion I have is do it slowly. If you read those books, altogether 3 books, there's probably about 850 pages there. And don't read it in 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. You'll miss 90% of what's there. You got to read a paragraph and then think, how does this paragraph apply to me? And think about it and do some work on it. And a lot of people read it like 10 pages a week, that sort of thing. It's something you have to read slowly and think about. Otherwise, you get to the end of it and it doesn't mean anything to you because it's all intellectual. And you don't want to just get this book intellectually. The idea isn't to read the book and be able to then do cocktail party chatter about the book, and sound really smart. The idea is to let those ideas sink into you at the being level to where they're a part of you, at the intuitive side of you, that they're a part of you. And the only way to do that is to just sit and think about what's being said, paragraph by paragraph. It's very dense. There's a lot of meaning in it. So you have to just chug through it slowly. And if you do, you'll get more out of it. But amazingly, if you read it a second time, you'd find things in there that were outstanding and you really learn a lot from, but you never knew they were in there. And how did I miss them the first time? I have people read it 5, 6, 7 times, and every time they find things that are really meaningful, but they didn't see it before. That's because after you read it, if you read it slowly and carefully, you're a different person at the end. You don't see reality the same way anymore. And now, it's like I said before, you get data, but you have to interpret it based on what you know and what you don't know. All of that affects your interpretation. Next time around, all the same data in the book, but you'll see a whole lot more things in it that you didn't notice before. So it's good to read slowly and maybe even visit it a couple of times. Most people, I'd say, if they just read the book, get maybe 10% of what's in it. So that's just a little advice to any of you that read it. Just take your time and read it slowly. It's fun. I try to have a lot of jokes and humor, and it's otherwise your head would explode halfway through. You can't be but so serious and so dense and thinking for so long before you just can't stand it anymore. So I put a lot of humor in it, try to lighten it up and make it a little easier to read, but it's not a simple read. It's something you work at.
All right, my friend. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, 3 hours and 13 minutes. That's good.
I'll probably split the second segment up into another interview, but
sure, split it up, whatever sizes work.
Well, more people will watch it when it's shorter. It's just unfortunately.
Absolutely. If you get the whole thing down to less than 10 minutes, you get a lot of people to look at it.
Yeah. In
10 minutes, I could probably spout 4 or 5 sound bites that really wouldn't mean anything, but they'd feel good after they read it. But they wouldn't know much. So, yes.
Well, yeah, that's the problem. It's harder to have deeper conversations when you truncate everything. So I think an hour is the optimal size because you can get into enough, but people don't also get tired and then fall away. So anyway, I appreciate your time, and this has been extremely illuminating.
Okay, well, good, Sean. I'm glad to have the opportunity, and I hope some of your watchers and listeners will get something significant out of it that will help them on their path to get to wherever it is they're trying to go. That's the whole point. The whole point, information is terrific, but shared information is much better. The fact that if you know something, well, great for you, but share it so that other people know it as well.
Well, lowering entropy is good for everybody. So
yes, indeed.
All right, my friend.
Well, so long. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you too.
If you enjoyed this video, please click on like, subscribe, and the notification button so that you're alerted anytime I post something new.